So I do want to bring in a friend of the show, Alex Traiman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. As always, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Josh, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I want to start with the comments made there by Israel's defense minister. What do you make of all of that? Because is it kind of Lebanon's job to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't have these weapons and isn't attacking?
Well, part of the ceasefire agreement that was put into place puts the Lebanese army in charge of southern Lebanon. They're the ones that are supposed to come down and ensure that Hezbollah doesn't rebuild its terrorist infrastructure in South Lebanon. So if Hezbollah does indeed start to rebuild some of its infrastructure in southern Lebanon, it will be the fault of the Lebanese military. And there are questions as to whether Hezbollah can easily infiltrate the Lebanese military to begin with, meaning that by agreeing to have the Lebanese army coming down, you're just having the fox guarding the henhouse. You're having Hezbollah now dressed as Lebanese military in South Lebanon, and then again threatening Israel. It should also be remembered that Hezbollah is a member of the parliament in Lebanon, and as such, if Hezbollah is a part of the governmental system there are questions as to whether you can distinguish between a political party and the entire country. And I do think that for Israel at this point, there has to be very, very strong threats against Lebanon, against Hezbollah, in response to any potential violations of the ceasefire agreement. It's only that deterrence that will keep peace in the region.
And of course, we were looking at a live look over the Israel-Lebanon border there, but I want to talk a little bit about Syria and the situation that's unfolding there. Is that likely, just based on your reporting and your knowledge here, to have any impact on the wars with Hamas and Hezbollah, or does that kind of remain unclear at this point?
Well, I think that this is a symptom. It's a result of what's happening with regards to the war between Israel and Hezbollah in particular, and Israel and Iran more directly. Iran has been significantly weakened as a result of this war. Hezbollah is Iran's forward-facing army. Iran has used Iraq and Syria as a land bridge in order to bring armaments into southern Lebanon. For them, that area is extremely important. Now that Iran has been degraded and weakened, they don't have the capacity to remain strongman in Syria. That's creating a vacuum. And then you have other players, some supported by Al-Qaeda and ISIS, others supported by Turkey. You also have Kurds, which are generally known to be more peaceful, only attacking if they're attacked, all vying for power in this failed state, which is in Syria. And so now we're seeing a resetting of policy all across the Middle East. We don't know how this is going to play out. Israel's certainly making a case and a stand to become the regional superpower. Iran had been the one trying to create itself as a regional superpower. So we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But there are many failed states across the Middle East, and we don't know how all the chips are going to fall at the end of this.
Yeah, and I do want to pop up this post here coming from the Israel Defense Forces not too long ago. They say that Hezbollah's representative to the Syrian military was eliminated in an intelligence-based strike, talking again about Syria here. How significant overall is that? Do we have a full understanding of that?
Well, Netanyahu made it clear, actually, in his address announcing the ceasefire, that part of the Israeli military will shift its operations towards Syria. The only way to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't rebuild itself in southern Lebanon is to make sure that they're not bringing weapons across via Iraq and Syria. And there's also the idea that Hezbollah could try to take advantage of the weakness inside Syria. And so certainly Israel doesn't want Hezbollah to simply migrate from southern Lebanon into Syria and set up a new base of attack there. So I do think that Israel is going to continue to be very active right now, especially without strong leadership in Syria. Israel is going to make sure that the vacuum's not filled by Iran and Hezbollah.
We know that Israel has been accused a lot over the past 14 months as the war in Gaza has unfolded of holding back humanitarian aid. But based on what you know and the pictures that we've seen coming in, the video, is that really the case?
Well, Israel's gone to unprecedented measures to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid into an area that's controlled by an enemy. I mean, you've never really seen that in the history of modern war. And even the United States has never delivered as much humanitarian aid into a war zone as Israel has into the Gaza Strip. The question is, what happens once that humanitarian aid gets across the border into Gaza? And the continuous reports of Hamas really infiltrating the mechanisms that can deliver the aid there. UNRWA was responsible for the aid. Now Israel saying they will no longer work with UNRWA because UNRWA is completely infiltrated by Hamas. Just last week, there was members of the World Central Kitchen, which have been proven to be participants in the October 7th attack, and they're working together with Hamas. There are numerous incidents of convoys of humanitarian aid being hijacked at gunpoint. And so the problem is not whether Israel facilitates the aid getting in, it's who controls that aid once it gets in. I think we may see in the coming weeks that Israel take a more forceful role in the distribution of this humanitarian aid to make sure that it reaches the Palestinians themselves.
We heard from President-elect Trump just a couple days ago as he said there will, quote, be all hell to pay if the hostages, the 100 that still remain being held by terrorists there and have been for 14 months, if they are not released by the time that he is inaugurated, that is less than 2 months away, about a month and a half from now, January 20th. Is it realistic that that will happen? And what do you make of those comments?
Well, I think those are important comments. I mean, it's part of the doctrine of peace through strength. The only way that that terrorists are going to bow to the wishes of free nations is if they think that those free nations are stronger and they will inflict significant damage. I do think it's possible. I mean, we saw in 1981 January, when Ronald Reagan was about to come into office, all the hostages that were being held at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran were released because the Iranians, the revolutionaries there were afraid of what would happen if Reagan got into office and those hostages were still being held. I think it's important comments. Whether Hamas will heed the warning, that remains to be seen. But we've already seen, for example, that Qatar has expelled the leadership of Hamas that had been housed there for years, basically because the Trump administration is coming into power and they would hold Qatar responsible for housing those terrorists in their country.
My last question here before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about a story that some information's coming in about. We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to take the stand today in his corruption trial, next week, I should say, but it's going to be in an underground courtroom in Tel Aviv due to apparent security issues. That's according to officials there. Do we know what those issues are, or if it's related to the wars in some way? Is that being kept under wraps? Do you have kind of an idea of what the situation is there?
Yeah, certainly. We recall that just several weeks back, Hezbollah attacked the prime minister's home with a drone. That drone hit bulletproof glass and didn't do much damage to the home. Netanyahu wasn't there. At this point, Netanyahu's schedule is never announced. People don't know where he's going to be. I mean, he's one of the most important figures in the country during this war. And if it's known where the interrogation is going to be held, where the prime minister is going to be for several hours, and if it's going to be held in a building that can't really facilitate the type of security that's required when the prime minister is someplace, it's a major security threat. I mean, the prime minister of Israel is one of the most heavily guarded men in the entire world, and so even more so during wartime.
All right. Alex Traiman, as always, CEO, Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. Appreciate you taking the time to be here. Anything you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I think it's interesting that you asked about Netanyahu's trial. This is a trial that's been going on for 4.5 years. It's a trial which would have ended in mistrial already on multiple occasions if this trial was being held in the United States for many different reasons. Basically, after the prosecution finished its case, the judges told them that based on the case that's been made, that he would be let off on all charges. And the prosecution said that no, you'll see during Netanyahu's defense that that you'll see that he's guilty. So this interrogation that's taking place now is the defense of all of the charges. And on the way things are going right now, there's a very, very strong likelihood that all the charges will be dropped at some point, but it's probably going to play out over the next several years.
All right. Alex Traiman, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. And I do want to pop up this live image that we do have